All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Mindgasms. So, I am Andrew, aka Maximum Mindgasms, for the purposes of this video. And this is another Idea Sex video about the political commentator slash podcaster slash writer slash rapper Coleman Hughes and Briahna Joy Gray, who is a former Bernie Sanders campaign advisor and a lawyer and political commentator, podcaster, and writer as well. She's more of a lefty, he's more of a centrist, and this is from a clip from his channel the other day where they're debating minimum wage. And they also get into Marx's labor theory of value, which I'm going to explain. And they talk about Briahna Joy Gray references the Marxist economist Richard Wolff talking about that, so I'm going to have him explain it also as well. So to start off with, let's get into this clip of them debating Medicare for all. Here we go. All right.
Equitable wages. Okay, well, you're the person you want to employ should also have the opportunity to go and work somewhere where they can earn a $15 minimum wage. One thing I will give Joe Biden credit for is that all federal employees now at least have a $15 minimum wage, and contractors have a $15 minimum wage. So maybe your friend isn't able to pay his or her employees a living wage. Okay. I don't think that means that employee deserves to be exploited. I think that means that they should be able to find a job on the job market that will pay them that. And if that means that your employee...
He pays them a living wage. You know, he pays them what waiters and get paid in Greenwich Village.
Coleman, that's not a living wage. And I don't mean this isn't your friend. I'm not saying your friend's a bad person. But the reality is, before we had a minimum wage, we also didn't have child labor laws. We also didn't have 40-hour week.
They're just talking about his friend who he referenced earlier, who is a small business owner who owns a restaurant.
We had all of these innovations around the New Deal because we were living in a hellscape where we were sending 9-year-olds down chimneys and they were dying at 25 of the black lung. We had no workplace protections. We had no nothing. So unless the argument is,
child labor was obviously really fucking terrible in human history. And I've read books describing it. And, you know, they had to keep the machines in the factories running 24/7. So in order to do that, they used the children to reach their hands inside the machines while they were still operating because they had small hands, so they could easily do that. So obviously tons of children got severely injured by literally trying to fix fucking machines while they were still operating. So, you know, the products of capitalism, as Briahna Joy Gray would present it, were just even more way more fucking terrible back then with child labor, etc.
I just don't believe in the minimum wage, and we should just have a libertarian hellscape. I mean, God bless you.
The argument is minimum wage versus wage subsidy. One forces me as a business owner to bear the cost of, you want to make the world a better place, but you're ordering me to allocate money in my business differently. And you're forcing...
I've never heard of the comparison between minimum wage and government subsidized wages before, which is one of the reasons I thought this was interesting. But this idea of, you know, forcing business owners to pay a minimum wage because it's an authoritarian government practice, I'm pretty skeptical of that argument.
You're forcing me essentially to fire someone in many cases.
In some cases.
Because you think you're making the world a better place, as opposed to direct a wage subsidy, which does the same thing, but puts the responsibility on the government.
Well, Coleman, let me ask you this hypothetical. If I'm able to run my business, if I'm able to find someone who's willing to edit my podcast for $1 an hour, let's say they're willing to do that because they're a non-documented immigrant who isn't able to get a job over the table. Let's say it's because they are under immense financial pressure because they have a student loan debt or some other kind of debt that's come due, and they're facing eviction, and they have a family or they have medical bills. Let's say whatever constraints they're under, they're willing to do it for an exploitative price when market is at least, let's say, $50 an hour for that job.
For a non-immigrant.
For someone who had the ability to get a different, to go elsewhere, to shop on the marketplace and take their labor elsewhere. I would argue that the only way I get that person to work for me below market value is because the system itself is broken, right? And this is where I think your mom was right about Marx. I'm sorry.
I'm not sure I totally understand the hypothetical because, if it's an immigrant working for you at a low wage, but it's below market for maybe what a native worker would demand, but it's market for immigrant labor in the industry.
The market is artificially created by constraints of the system that we designed. These things aren't natural law. The reality is
yeah, I mean, I'm not a lefty or a Marxist on economics or anything like that, but I agree that this conservative and even more so libertarian perspective that the free market is this magical process that automatically regulates itself and it's just so magical and it makes the world a better place, bro, is just really fucking stupid. And most economists think that view is stupid too, because of course there are economists across the political spectrum and they agree and disagree about the degree of regulation that there should be and use different economic theories, but most of them don't think that there should be no regulation whatsoever, other than those Austrian economists who especially anarcho-capitalists like Dave Smith like to cite all the time, and their theories of economics are really not very good according to other economists. And also, if you read their books themselves, like von Mises and plenty of those other Austrian economists and intellectuals who people like Dave Smith and other anarcho-capitalists mention all the time.
Oh, I don't want to know that if I want to get into this whole profit as wage theft right now, since we're kind of probably nearing the end of our time together. But the reality is, if I'm able to exploit somebody because they don't have options, if I take that ability away,
I worry you're preloading the argument by describing it as exploitation rather than employment.
Well, this is why we have to do labor profit is wage theft.
Yeah.
This is why we have to do that. That's why we always have to do that dance. And I know that, look, I am not some great Marx scholar. I don't know that I've read Marx outside the context of some sophomore college class. I'm not that person.
He's really hard to read.
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking over at my bookshelf.
Yeah, especially his magnum opus, Capital Volume 1. There were 3 volumes of it, but Volume 1 was the only one that was published when he was alive. Volume 2 and 3 are mostly compilations of his notes that were going to be Volume 2 and 3. And Capital Volume 1, it's, like I said, it's his magnum opus on economics, especially because he talked way more about economics than politics, contrary to particularly right-wing analyses of Marx, and it's extremely fucking boring. I forced myself to read it so I could be informed about Marx, but it's extremely fucking boring, and I really don't recommend it unless you want to just make sure you're really educated about Marx.
My bookshelf, because there's many unopened books over there. There's many books that I got 3 words in. But here's the basic gist as I understand it. I'm sorry, all the Marxist scholars who I'm sure are going to tell me that I've oversimplified this. But if I am a business owner and I build my business's tables, the reason I'm a business owner, I come to this with capital. I have the capital to buy the wood that is going to go into the tables, right? That's how I'm the business owner. How I got the capital, it's an interesting question. No one ever goes back that far. And that's a really important conversation to have. But I have capital. Let's say it takes $5 of wood for me to build every table. And once the table is built, I can sell it for $10. Okay, that means that's $5 of profit. Somebody built that table, right? And the person who built that table through their labor turned a $5 pile of wood into a $10 table, right? It's worth $10 only because of their labor turned that $5 wood into a $10 table. Without them, I still just have a $5 pile of wood, right?
Yeah, this is the labor theory of value, right?
Correct. So for me to profit, and the whole reason I'm in this, right, is because I want to profit. For me to profit, I have to take some portion of that $5. And that is what one might call exploitation. Because in a world where the laborer happened to have the $5 for the wood to begin with, they would be able to completely recoup the benefits of their labor.
So
yeah, I'll get into it in a little more detail, as I said, not excruciating detail, of course, but yeah, I think she's actually doing a pretty decent explanation, rather, of Marx's labor theory of value so far.
Managers, all managers and owners could be erased from the earth, and the production would stay the same.
No, the issue is whether or not the people who are able to front capital should be the ones that are deciding who gets what cut of the labor, as opposed to these other models that the left talks about, like employee ownership, where there are more collaborative decisions being made that aren't based on who just happened to come in with a capital to begin with, right? Because the reason that we have all of these jobs that got offshored, for
I think she's specifically referencing worker co-ops, like a lot of lefties mention all the time, such as Ben Burgess, who I've talked with before. And the example they always use is Madrigal, who I forget what country they're from, but they're a worker-owned co-ops, and there obviously aren't very many of them. But that's what lefties like them advocate for, especially anarcho-syndicalists, like kind of Noam Chomsky, or whether you define him as that or a libertarian socialist is debatable, and kind of similar with that extreme lefty YouTuber Vosh. They kind of see that as, you know, the democratic worker-owned control of companies, but they want to spread that to all of society as a whole, basically. But anyway, that's an interesting concept, rather, worker-owned co-ops.
For instance, is because what's good for the corporate owner at the top in terms of marginally increasing profit by 1 cent by making a Malaysian child build your sneakers or whatever is not what the decision making would be of.
I think you'd probably save way more than 1 cent by making a Malaysian child make your speakers. Probably way fucking more than that, like several dollars at least, I would say. I'm not the best at math, but I think that's a safe estimate.
Laborer in Detroit who doesn't really care about making 1 more cent profit on their dividend. They care about the shop staying local, their ability to drive to work, their ability to keep their job and keep their community intact. And we have these perverse incentives that are happening all over the place because we have a system that is able to be dictated by the owners of capital, who, I got to say, often came to that capital in dishonest ways that had nothing to do with their own work or ingenuity, its inheritance, its legacies of slavery or colonialism or exploitation. And I know I'm losing people now saying these words, but it is just a historical reality of the situation. People weren't just bestowed with random amounts of money according to merit upon birth. I wish that's the way the world was.
Yeah, the meritocracy is definitely a fucking myth. I mean, there is some merit to it, but it's definitely not the way the world, and it's definitely not the way the free market works, I would say.
World was, but
so
it's not.
What is your model? Is there a company you can point to that's doing it this way that you think is doing a great job that other companies should emulate?
So employee ownership is a huge thing. And I would recommend you maybe have, if you haven't already, Professor Richard Wolff on the program. I would be happy to put you two in touch, and he would do a much better job at this than I am. He's a Marxist economist and a really wonderful speaker. But Costco, for instance, is an example of an employer ownership model where these kinds of distribution decisions are being made by a collective. I think the Packers,
like Costco has always been touted as having like a great worker culture and so forth. But I'm also, I
didn't know that they were a worker-owned co-op before this.
Is it the democratic socialist end goal to see, Walmart and Amazon just all looking like Costco? Would that be the like a ball in the net? Or my suspicion is there would be some still very deep and fundamental critiques of even that system, right?
Well, no. I mean, I think the idea would be if business decisions were being made by an employee-owned model, that many, if not all...
I think I might have just got cut out for a second, but I said you're measuring a hypothetical, so that's very hard to predict.
All of the vagaries of companies like Amazon would cease to exist because the people who are designing how the company works would be changing them.
All right. So yeah, I thought that was interesting. The subject of minimum wage is interesting to me because I'm not entirely convinced by either Coleman Hughes or Briahna Joy Gray's arguments, but they're both very intelligent and articulate and make good arguments. I think there should be a minimum wage, but it seems to me that it kind of makes sense economically for minimum wage to be different depending on where you are geographically. And that's part of why here in Canada there are different minimum wages between provinces, similarly to how there are different state wages in the US, and that it's more complicated than that. But yeah, she also mentioned Marx's labor theory of value and Professor Richard Wolff. So I'm just going to briefly go to a brief explanation just on Wikipedia here of Marx's labor theory of value and have Richard Rorty explain it here. Not Richard Rorty. He's my favorite atheist pragmatist philosopher, Richard Wolff, the Marxist economist, rather. So here. Okay. So just the bare bones, most simple explanation here is the theory's basic. The theory, so the labor theory of value is a major pillar of traditional Marxian economics, which is evident in Marx's masterpiece Capital, 1867. That's his magnum opus, as I said. The theory's basic claim is simple. The value of a commodity can be objectively measured by the average number of labor hours required to produce that commodity. So basically the value of a good can be objectively determined by the number of hours of labor it takes to produce that product. So that makes sense. I mean, I don't think it's a widely used thing, but as you'll see, it's actually less controversial than you might think it is, as we'll see in Richard Rorty explaining it here and getting into a bit more of a detailed explanation. So let's see I keep calling him Richard Rorty. Let's see Richard. It's because I'm much more familiar with Richard Rorty than Richard Wolff. So let's see Richard Wolff explain what the labor theory of value is here.
This question comes to us from the Ask Prof. Wolff page on
well, that's very quiet.
That's rdwolf.com. And in particular, today's question comes to us from Noah Dunn. His question, like others who have sent me similar questions, has to do with the labor theory of value, something associated particularly with Karl Marx's economics. Although if you actually study the labor theory of value, you will discover that Adam Smith and David Ricardo, usually considered the fathers of modern non-Marxian economics, were actually proponents of a labor theory of value. So associating with Marx is a bit mistaken. Even more mistaken is the dismissal of this idea because it is misunderstood. Here's what I mean. Labor theory of value.
Yeah, also Marx himself never actually used that term labor theory of value, even in Capital.
It is not a theory of the prices of things. The prices of things depends on what's going on among the people wanting to buy it and what's going on among the people wanting to sell it. There's a negotiation that goes on, and the price goes up and down depending on how many people are buying and selling and how urgently they want to buy or sell a particular good. Marx was never so silly or simple-minded as to suggest that the price of something being affected by buyers and sellers would necessarily be accounted for by the amount of labor that went in it. So what does the labor theory of value tell us? Well, first, notice something. It's not the labor theory of price. It's the labor
Wouldn't that be a good idea, though? I mean, obviously, I'm not an expert on economics, but wouldn't it be a good idea to do that? I don't know. Maybe that's a flaw in the labor theory of value, but maybe I'm just understanding it incorrectly here.
So we have to understand what is value. And here's what Marx meant. In every society in the history of the human race, that society could only survive if it produced the goods and services without which life isn't possible. The food, the clothing, the shelter, the things we need. So in every society, you have to allocate, you have to assign the people who can do the work to make the clothing, the food, the shelter that the community needs. Somehow that has to be worked out. Maybe a chief will tell this one you make bread, this one you make shirts, and so on. Or maybe a council will, or maybe it'll happen in the market. There's lots of ways it can happen, but it has to happen. And Marx was very interested in understanding how the labor gets organized in a society. So the labor theory of value was to say, let's look at commodities, things that are produced that we all need, by focusing on the labor in them, because that will tell us something about a society. So let me conclude by focusing in on what Marx thought labor would teach us. And here's the answer. In a society, the labor that gets done to produce everything has an interesting quality. The labor that's done produces more than is given to the people, the laborers, who are doing the work. In other words, laborers always produce.
Yeah, that's the aspect of it that Briahna Joy Gray was explaining, right?
A surplus of goods and services beyond what they get. And the interesting question is, who gets that surplus? In slavery, the workers are slaves and the master gets it. In feudalism, the workers are serfs and the lord gets it. And in capitalism, the workers are employees and the employer gets it. The labor theory of value looks at labor because it sees in this arrangement who produces the surplus and who gets it a key to what's wrong with society and how it needs to be fixed. It's a completely different question to conventional economics. They're not interested in surpluses. They're not much interested in labor. They are interested in the prices of things, why they bounce up and down. Very nice. I can see their interest, but it's not my interest because I'm trying to understand what makes a society work well or not. When do you need social change? For that, the labor theory of value is very helpful, and the theory of price of conventional economics, not so much.
Yeah, that was good. So, yeah, it's interesting. There's all of this stuff is pretty debatable, I would say, but minimum wage is a very controversial subject, and people disagree with it a lot. I think it's ridiculous to have no minimum wage, like I said, but what the minimum wage should be is debatable, and it probably should be different depending on where you are geographically. So I'm just going to read the first paragraph of the Wikipedia page here on the labor theory of value, because it's hard to find where Marx talks about it in Capital Volume 1, because as I said, he doesn't actually use the exact phrase labor theory of value. So let's go to this here, and some of this is what Richard Wolff already said, but this is interesting. So the labor theory of value, LTV, is a theory of value that argues that the economic value of a good or service is determined by the total amount of socially necessary labor, quote unquote, required to produce it. The LTV is usually associated with Marxian economics, although it originally appeared in the theories of earlier classical economists such as Adam Smith and David Ricardo, like Richard Wolff said, right? And later in anarchist economics. So it's interesting that the Marxist labor theory of value was used by anarchists too. Also, because, as I've said before, I don't know if you've heard me say this before, but I've mentioned it a few times, that contrary to especially what anarcho-capitalists say and the way that people like Dave Smith and Michael Malice paint anarchists as them being like kind of more right-leaning, a lot of the early anarchists like Bakunin and Kropotkin were actually literally disillusioned Marxists or socialists who went to anarchism as a way of achieving left-wing goals, and they were anti-government and anti-capitalist. So that's interesting that anarchists, and especially Adam Smith himself, were advocates of Marx's labor theory of value, or at least the labor theory of value, I should say. Okay, so, and later in anarchist economics, Adam Smith, saw the price of a commodity in terms of the labor that the purchaser must expend to buy it, which embodies the concept of how much labor a commodity, a tool, for example, can save the purchaser. The LTV, or labor theory of value, is central to Marxist theory, which holds that the working class is exploited under capitalism. Briahna Joy Gray used that word exploitation a lot, and dissociates price and value. However, Marx did not refer to his own theory of value as a labor theory of value, as I said. And this idea of exploitation, that's an idea in Marxism that I disagree with, and a lot of other people do too as well. I don't think that capitalism inherently exploits the working class, but the working class certainly is exploited by capitalism in a lot of different ways. You know, you have to call and get time off work. You probably often have to work shitty hours. I've had this happen to me before. Schedule me for 39 hours a week so that they don't have to pay me for full time and I don't get benefits and all that kind of shit. And, you know, you have to do some boring, shitty job that you hate, and maybe your boss treats you like shit, and innumerable other examples. So there certainly are examples of exploitation of the working class in capitalism, but I'm not so what Marx would say, and where I would disagree with Marx and Marxist economists, is that this is an inherent aspect of capitalism, which I'm not so sure that it is. But again, the labor theory of value is very interesting, and people poo-poo everything about Marx, especially right-wingers, but the labor theory of value is interesting, and I think it has some merit to it, and anarchists were for it, and so was Adam Smith, and you know, conservatives who think that just Marx is the worst, most evil person and Marxism is the most terrible thing that ever happened in human history never fucking mention that, do they? All right, so yeah, I hope you enjoyed just watching with me and analyzing this debate between Coleman Hughes and Briahna Joy Gray about minimum wage. Let me know in the comments, what do you think about minimum wage? Do you think there should be one? There shouldn't be one? Do you think it should differ depending on where you live? And what do you think about Marx's labor theory of value? Do you think it makes sense? Do you think that capitalism inherently exploits the working class? Let me know all of your thoughts on these things in the comments. And yeah, I thought that would be really interesting and kind of a way to educate people a little bit about the Marx's labor theory of value. I'm not an expert on it. I've read Capital Volume 1 because I forced myself to, and I've read other stuff by Marx, but I'm not an economist. But anyway, yeah, I thought that was interesting, all that stuff of them debating minimum wage and getting into Marx's labor theory value. So thanks everyone for watching. Hope you enjoyed this. Look out for new videos probably on Sunday. Finally going to do my movie chat on Taxi Driver with Dusty and Chris, who I always do movie chats with, the 70s movie directed by Martin Scorsese and starring Robert De Niro, which is one of the first movies about basically an incel mass shooter and also underage prostitution and all sorts of dark shit. And check out my last video yesterday about the new trending in the Twitter sphere topic about the Flash actor, non-binary Ezra Miller, being accused by the Daily Beast and TMZ and the New York Post and the white supremacist far-right person, Lauren Southern, of pedophile grooming a child. So that's pretty awful shit if it's true, but people are jumping to conclusions and it's important to remain skeptical. But if it's actually true, this person should sure as fuck be prosecuted to the full extent of the law. And yeah, thanks everyone again for watching. Click that like button, share this video everywhere, click that bell to be notified when I come out with new videos. Check out my Patreon page, subscribe. I think I said that already. The link for my Patreon page is in the description of the video as always. If you want to give me like $1, $5, $10, $100,000 a month, any amount is greatly appreciated. And like I always say, I love you all. Keep being the tiny beam of light that shines through the almost impenetrable darkness in the universe. And most importantly, always remember this: the funk cures all, and groove is in the heart. And Coleman Hughes and Briahna Joy Gray are very interesting and intelligent people who have slightly different political ideologies, but they both make good arguments for both, I would say, centrism for Coleman Hughes and basically progressivism for Briahna Joy Gray. So yeah, check out all their stuff, check out that video. Thanks everyone for watching, share this everywhere, and adios until next time, everyone.